The morning sun cast long shadows across the archaeological site when Dr. Elena Vasquez first noticed something was wrong. The excavation team had been working on the ancient burial complex for 3 months, but today felt different. The usual sounds of careful digging and whispered conversations were missing. Instead, an eerie silence hung over the site like a thick blanket. Elena walked toward the main dig area, her boots crunching on the dry earth. The team had discovered this site 6 months ago, hidden beneath layers of sediment in what was once called the Nevada Desert. Carbon dating suggested the structures were over 12,000 years old, making them some of the oldest human constructions ever found on Earth. But that was before the collective arrived. The Galactic Collective had made first contact with Earth 15 years ago. They were a union of 17 different alien species, all highly advanced and seemingly peaceful. They came offering knowledge, technology, and a place among the stars for humanity. Most humans welcomed them with open arms, eager to learn and grow beyond their small blue planet. Elena reached the edge of the excavation pit and stopped. At the bottom, surrounded by carefully exposed stone walls covered in strange symbols, stood a single figure. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing simple dark clothing that seemed to absorb the morning light. His hair was black with streaks of silver, and his face carried lines that spoke of both great age and deep sorrow. She had never seen him before. "Excuse me," Elena called down. "This is a restricted archaeological site. You need to leave immediately." The man looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. "I cannot do that, Dr. Vasquez. I have a duty to perform." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. How did he know her name? She pulled out her communication device and called site security. "We have an unauthorized person in the main dig. Please respond immediately." The man continued to stand motionless in the center of the excavation. Around him, the ancient stone walls rose like the ribs of some massive buried creature. The symbols carved into them seemed to pulse with an inner light that Elena was sure hadn't been there yesterday. Within minutes, 3 security officers arrived, followed by Dr. James Chen, the expedition leader. Chen looked down into the pit with confusion and growing concern. "Sir, you need to come up here right now," Chen shouted. "This is a protected archaeological site under collective oversight." The man shook his head slowly. "The collective has no authority here. This place belongs to humanity and it must be protected." One of the security officers, a young woman named Sarah Mills, started down the ladder into the excavation. As her feet touched the bottom, something extraordinary happened. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and a low humming sound filled the air. The very ground seemed to vibrate with an energy that made everyone's teeth ache. Officer Mills stumbled backward. "What the hell was that?" The mysterious man turned to face her, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her heart race. It wasn't fear or surprise. It was recognition, as if he had been expecting this reaction all along. "The Guardians are awakening," he said quietly. "They have slept for millennia, waiting for this moment." Dr. Chen activated his emergency communicator, the one that connected directly to the Collective Oversight Committee. "This is Site Leader Chen. We have a situation at Excavation 7, requesting immediate assistance from collective authorities." The response came within minutes. 3 sleek collective shuttles descended from the sky, their silvery hulls reflecting the desert sun. Elena watched as tall, elegant beings emerged from the crafts. The Althari were the primary representatives of the collective on Earth. They stood 7 feet tall with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Commander Zethkar, the lead Althari official, approached the excavation site with long, graceful strides. Elena had worked with him before on several digs. He was always polite, always helpful, but today something was different. Today he looked worried. "Dr. Chen," Zethkar said, his voice carrying the musical quality common to his species, "we received your emergency transmission. What exactly is the nature of the disturbance?" Chen pointed down into the pit. "We have an unauthorized individual who refuses to leave. He somehow activated some kind of energy field in the ruins." Zethkar moved to the edge of the excavation and looked down. When his eyes met those of the mysterious man below, Elena saw something she had never seen before in any collective member's face. Fear. "Impossible," Zethkar whispered. "They were all supposed to be gone." The man in the pit smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. You thought you had eliminated us all, didn't you, Althari? You believed your lies about peaceful contact and mutual cooperation would be enough to make humanity forget what they truly are. Elena looked between the collective commander and the strange man, confusion growing in her mind. What is he talking about? Zethkar, what does he mean? But the Althari commander was already speaking rapidly into his own communication device, using words in his native language that the translation software couldn't process. Within moments, more shuttles arrived, these carrying armed collective security forces. The man in the pit laughed, a sound that echoed off the stone walls like thunder. So it begins again. The same pattern, the same fear. You cannot destroy what we protect, Althari. Humanity's true legacy will not be buried beneath your deceptions. As the collective forces surrounded the excavation site, Elena realized that everything she thought she knew about first contact, about the peaceful arrival of the aliens, about humanity's place in the galaxy, was about to change forever. The arrest, when it came, was swift and overwhelming. 12 armed collective officers descended into the pit, but the man offered no resistance. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, as they bound him with energy restraints that flickered and sparked against his skin. As they led him away, he looked back at Elena one final time. Remember this day, Dr. Vasquez. Remember that some truths are worth any sacrifice to protect. The excavation site fell silent once more, but the questions that day had raised would echo through the halls of power across two worlds. The collective detention center sat like a black cube in the heart of New Geneva, its smooth walls reflecting nothing. Elena stood outside its entrance, clutching a visitor's pass that had taken 3 days of bureaucratic fighting to obtain. Beside her, Dr. Chen shifted nervously, his usually confident demeanor shaken by recent events. Are you sure about this? Chen asked for the 10th time. The collective administration wasn't happy about granting us access. If we ask the wrong questions, Elena cut him off with a sharp look. James, in 30 years of archaeology, I've never seen anything like what happened at that site. The energy readings, the way those symbols responded to human presence, the way Commander Zethkar reacted when he saw that man. We need answers. The detention center's entrance opened with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile white corridor that seemed to stretch forever. An Althari guard, shorter than Zethkar but with the same pale blue skin and dark eyes, gestured for them to follow. Their footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, the only sound in the oppressive silence. Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition's linguist and cultural specialist, had spent the last 3 days analyzing the symbols from the excavation site. Her findings had been disturbing enough to convince the university to push for this meeting. The symbols weren't just decorative. They were a language, but unlike any human language ever discovered. More troubling, they seemed to contain scientific formulas and star charts that shouldn't have existed 12,000 years ago. The guard led them through a series of security checkpoints, each one scanning them with beams of light that made Elena's skin crawl. Finally, they arrived at a small white room with a single table and 3 chairs. On the far side of a transparent barrier sat the man from the excavation. Up close, Elena could see details that the distance had hidden. His clothes, which had appeared simple, were actually made from a material that seemed to shift and change in the light. His hands, folded calmly on the table, bore scars that looked like they came from weapons she couldn't identify. But most striking were his eyes. They held a depth of knowledge that seemed impossible for any human to possess. Dr. Vasquez, the man said before anyone else could speak. Dr. Chen, thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy to arrange this meeting. Elena leaned forward. Who are you? How do you know us? And what did you mean when you said the collective was lying about humanity's true legacy? The man smiled sadly. My name is Marcus Webb, though I have carried many names over the years. I know you because it has been my duty to watch over those who seek to uncover humanity's past. As for your third question, that requires a longer explanation. Chen pulled out a recording device, but Marcus shook his head. No recordings, Doctor. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be captured in permanent form. What I tell you must live only in your memories, at least for now. Elena felt frustration building. Mr. Webb, we're scientists. We deal in facts, evidence, and verifiable data. If you want us to believe whatever story you're about to tell, we need more than just your word. Marcus reached into his pocket, moving slowly to avoid alarming any hidden security systems. He pulled out what looked like a simple metal disc about the size of his palm. The moment it touched the table's surface, the room's lighting changed. The harsh white fluorescence dimmed, replaced by a warm golden glow that seemed to come from the disk itself. "What you found at the excavation site," Marcus began, "is not just an ancient human burial ground. It's a repository, a storage facility built by my people 12,000 years ago to preserve the truth about what humanity once was and what we were forced to become." Chen leaned back in his chair. "Forced to become by whom?" "By them," Marcus said, gesturing toward the ceiling and the collective facility beyond. 15 years ago, when the Althari arrived with their offers of peace and technological advancement, they didn't come as friends. They came as conquerors, but their methods were more subtle than simple invasion. Elena shook her head. "That's impossible. The collective has shared their technology freely. They've helped us cure diseases, solve energy problems, even begin to repair environmental damage. Why would they do that if they were conquerors?" Marcus touched the disk again, and suddenly the air above the table shimmered. Images began to form, translucent but clear enough to see. Elena watched in amazement as star charts appeared, showing Earth's position relative to other solar systems. But these weren't modern charts. The style, the mathematical notations, everything suggested they were thousands of years old. 12,000 years ago, Marcus continued, humanity was not the primitive species the history books describe. We had mastered faster-than-light travel. We had colonies on 17 different worlds. We were part of a galactic community, but not the one that exists today. The images shifted, showing what looked like massive space battles. Ships of unfamiliar design fought against vessels that Elena recognized as collective technology, though these looked more advanced than anything she had seen before. The Althari and their allies fought a war against the old galactic order, Marcus explained. They called it the Great Cleansing. Their goal was to eliminate any species that had the potential to challenge their dominance. Humanity was one of their primary targets, not because we were violent, but because we had something they feared. Chen stared at the images floating above the table. What could we possibly have that an advanced alien species would fear? Marcus smiled, and for the first time Elena saw pride in his expression. Adaptability. The ability to take any technology, any concept, any challenge, and not just master it, but improve upon it. In a galaxy where most species had reached technological plateaus millions of years ago, humans kept growing, kept learning, kept pushing boundaries. The images changed again, showing Earth as it might have been thousands of years ago. Instead of primitive hunters and gatherers, Elena saw cities that floated in the sky, gardens that grew in impossible geometric patterns, and humans who seemed to glow with inner light. The collective couldn't destroy us completely, Marcus continued. We were too scattered, too resilient. So they did something worse. They used a weapon that erased our collective memory, reset our civilization to a primitive state, and then waited. They waited 12,000 years for us to evolve back to the point where we might be useful to them. Elena felt her worldview cracking like glass. You're saying they've been manipulating human development all this time? Not directly, Marcus replied. They planted certain genetic markers, certain drives that would push us toward specific technological developments. They wanted us to reach a certain level of capability, but never to exceed it. A perpetual servant species, advanced enough to be useful but limited enough to never threaten them again. Chen stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're talking about a conspiracy that spans millennia. Where's your proof? Where are these other humans who supposedly remember the truth? Marcus looked directly at Elena, and she felt something pass between them, a recognition that she couldn't explain. The proof is in the sites you've been excavating, Dr. Vasquez. The proof is in the genetic anomalies that your medical scientists can't explain. The proof is in the dreams that some humans have. Dreams of flying between stars and building wonders that shouldn't be possible. Elena remembered her own dreams. Vivid nighttime visions of standing on alien worlds under unfamiliar constellations. She had always dismissed them as the product of an overactive imagination, fed by too much science fiction. Now she wasn't so sure. There are others, Marcus admitted to Chen. Not many, but some. We call ourselves the Guardians. We were those who managed to resist the memory weapon, who maintained the knowledge of what we once were. For 12,000 years, we've hidden among regular humans, protecting the sites where the true history is stored, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The golden light from the disk began to fade, and Elena realized their time was running short. "Why now?" she asked urgently. "Why reveal this now?" Marcus stood as well, his movements careful and deliberate. "Because the collective has decided that humanity has reached the limit of usefulness in our current form. They're planning what they call the final integration. Within 5 years, every human will be implanted with collective neural interfaces. They'll tell you it's for better communication, for sharing their vast knowledge. In reality, it's the final step in turning humanity into a true slave species." The lights returned to their harsh white intensity, and the images disappeared. Elena heard the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside. "The site you discovered is one of 7, Marcus said quickly. "If you can activate all 7 repositories before the integration begins, you can unlock humanity's genetic memory and restore what we once were. But be careful. The collective will do anything to stop you." The door opened and Althari guards entered. As they led Marcus away, he called back one final message. "Look for the others, Dr. Vasquez. Trust in the dreams. Trust in what humanity can become." Elena and Chen sat in stunned silence long after he was gone, each lost in their own thoughts about the impossible choice that now lay before them. The new Geneva Tribunal Hall buzzed with nervous energy as beings from across the collective gathered for what many were calling the most important trial in recent galactic history. Elena sat in the public gallery, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as she watched the proceedings unfold below. Beside her, Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably, still processing everything they had learned during their meeting with Marcus Webb. The tribunal itself was an impressive sight. 7 judges sat behind a curved desk that seemed to hover in midair. 3 were Althari, their pale blue skin and dark eyes giving them an ethereal appearance. 2 were Keth Mori, massive beings with chitinous shells and multiple arms that moved in complex patterns as they communicated through gesture. 1 was from the silicon-based Veltar species, its crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. The 7th and final judge was human. Judge Patricia Morrison had been one of Earth's most respected legal minds before the collective arrived. She had adapted quickly to interstellar law, and now served as humanity's primary representative in galactic legal proceedings. Elena had researched her extensively after learning about the trial, hoping to find an ally in the coming proceedings. What she found instead was a woman who seemed completely dedicated to collective principles and suspicious of anything that might disrupt the careful balance between species. Marcus Webb entered the courtroom flanked by 4 collective security officers. He had been given standard prisoner's clothing, a simple gray jumpsuit that somehow made him look smaller and more vulnerable than he had in the detention center, but his eyes remained sharp and alert, scanning the crowd until they found Elena's face. He nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle that she almost missed it. The chief prosecutor, a tall Althari named Counselor Reshitai, stood to address the tribunal. Her voice carried the musical quality common to her species, but today it held an edge of urgency that Elena had never heard before. "Honored judges," Reshitai began, "we are gathered here today to address crimes that threaten the very foundation of peaceful cooperation between our species. The defendant, who calls himself Marcus Webb, stands accused of criminal trespass, destruction of protected historical sites, incitement to rebellion, and terrorism against collective operations." Elena felt her stomach drop. Terrorism. The charges were far more serious than anyone had expected. Reshitai continued, "The evidence will show that this individual is part of a radical human faction that rejects the benefits of collective membership. They seek to spread dangerous misinformation about our peaceful first contact and undermine the trust that has been built between our peoples over the past 15 years. Defense counsel was provided by the collective legal system, a young Althari lawyer named Advocate Telnos who looked nervous and unprepared. Elena wondered if this was intentional, a way to ensure that Marcus would not receive adequate representation. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Before we proceed with opening statements, I want to address the unusual nature of this case. Mr. Webb, you have refused to provide any background information about yourself. No birth records, no educational history, no employment records. In fact, according to our databases, you don't appear to exist in any official human documentation. How do you explain this?" Marcus stood slowly, his chains clinking softly in the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, The explanation is simple, though you may find it difficult to accept. I am older than your records suggest, and my existence predates the database systems that the collective helped establish on Earth. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Prosecutor Reshtai objected immediately. Your Honor, the defendant is clearly attempting to waste the tribunal's time with fantasy and delusion. Human lifespans are well documented, and no human could be old enough to predate our assistance with Earth's record-keeping systems. But Judge Morrison held up her hand for silence. Something in Marcus's tone had caught her attention. Mr. Webb, are you claiming to be older than 15 years? Because that would make you impossible according to standard human biology. Marcus smiled, and Elena saw that same sad expression she had noticed in the detention center. Your Honor, I am claiming to be much older than that. Much older than this tribunal, this city, or even this civilization. I have walked the earth for over 2,000 years, and I remember things that others have been made to forget. The courtroom erupted. Beings from multiple species began talking at once, their various languages creating a cacophony that the translation system struggled to process. Judge Morrison banged her gavel repeatedly, but it took several minutes to restore order. Dr. Chen leaned over to Elena. 2,000 years? He told us he was from 12,000 years ago. What's he playing at? Elena shook her head, but something about Marcus's claim resonated with her. In her dreams, the ones she had never talked about with anyone, she sometimes found herself in the body of someone much older, someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Prosecutor Reshtai had regained her composure. Your Honor, this clearly demonstrates the defendant's mental instability. I move that he be evaluated by collective psychological specialists before these proceedings continue. Objection, Marcus said before his own lawyer could respond. I submit to no examination by those who have already decided my fate. Instead, I offer proof of my claims. He reached slowly into his pocket, moving carefully to avoid alarming the security officers. From it, he produced another of the metallic discs that Elena had seen in the detention center. But this one was different. Where the other had been plain metal, this one was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to move and shift in the courtroom's lighting. This device contains a complete record of my life experiences, Marcus announced. Not just memories, but verifiable historical data cross-referenced with astronomical events, genetic records, and technological developments. I offer it as evidence to support my testimony. Judge Morrison looked intrigued despite herself. And how would we verify the authenticity of such a device? For all we know, this could be an elaborate fabrication. Marcus smiled. Simple, Your Honor. Have your best collective scientists examine it. Use any tests you wish. I guarantee that the technology used to create this record will be beyond anything currently available to either human or collective science. Elena watched as the judges conferred among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a complex web of sounds, gestures, and light patterns. Finally, Judge Morrison spoke. Very well, Mr. Webb. We will have this device examined by our technical specialists. However, these proceedings will continue while that analysis takes place. Counselor Reshtai, please present your opening statement. The prosecutor stood once again, her composure fully restored. Honored judges, the case before you is straightforward. The defendant illegally entered a protected archaeological site and activated unknown technologies that could have posed a danger to everyone present. When confronted by legitimate authorities, he refused to comply with lawful orders and made threatening statements about the collective's presence on Earth. She activated a holographic display that showed footage from the excavation site. Elena watched herself calling for security, saw Marcus standing calmly among the glowing symbols, witnessed the moment when the stone walls had come alive with energy. This footage clearly shows the defendant's actions, Reshtai continued. What it doesn't show is the potential catastrophe that could have resulted from his reckless behavior. The energy readings detected at the site were off the charts. If the defendant had continued his activities, he could have triggered a massive explosion that would have killed dozens of people. Elena frowned. That wasn't what had happened at all. The energy had been strange, yes, but it hadn't felt dangerous. If anything, it had felt welcoming, as if the site had been waiting for human contact. Advocate Telnos rose for the defense, his young voice shaking slightly. Honored judges, my client's actions, while perhaps misguided, were motivated by a sincere belief that he was protecting important historical artifacts. The prosecution has provided no evidence that his presence at the site actually endangered anyone. Elena could see that this wasn't going well. The defense lawyer was clearly overwhelmed and unprepared for the complexity of the case. She found herself wishing she could testify on Marcus's behalf, to tell the tribunal about the things he had shown them in the detention center. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus suddenly stood again. "Your Honor, I request permission to call a witness." Judge Morrison looked surprised. "You wish to call a witness? Your counsel hasn't submitted any witness list." "The witness is here in the courtroom today," Marcus replied, his eyes finding Elena's face. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, the archaeologist who discovered the site in question. She can testify about what actually happened when the ancient technologies were activated." Elena felt her heart stop. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward her, including the dark, unreadable gazes of the Althari judges. She hadn't expected to be drawn into the proceedings directly, but now she faced a choice that could change everything. Prosecutor Reshtai immediately objected. "Your Honor, Dr. Vasquez has not been prepared as a witness. She may have been influenced by the defendant's radical propaganda. Her testimony would be unreliable at best." But Judge Morrison was already looking at Elena with curiosity. "Dr. Vasquez, are you willing to testify under oath about the events at the excavation site?" Elena stood slowly, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She thought about Marcus's warnings, about the final integration he had described, about the dreams that had haunted her for years. Then she thought about her duty as a scientist to seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "I am willing to testify." As Elena made her way down to the witness stand, she could feel Elena's hand trembled slightly as she placed it on the crystalline oath device, a piece of Veltar technology that could supposedly detect lies through bioelectromagnetic resonance. The device hummed softly and glowed with a gentle blue light, indicating that it was ready to monitor her testimony. "Dr. Vasquez," Judge Morrison began, "please state your credentials for the record." Elena took a deep breath. "I am Dr. Elena Maria Vasquez, Professor of Archaeological Sciences at the University of New Geneva. I hold degrees in archaeology, xenoarchaeology, and comparative cultural studies. I have been the lead archaeologist on 17 major excavations, including 5 joint projects with the Collective Archaeological Survey." Judge Morrison nodded. "And were you present at Excavation Site 7 on the morning when the defendant was discovered?" "Yes, Your Honor. I was the first to observe Mr. Webb at the site." Prosecutor Reshtai stood to begin her cross-examination. "Dr. Vasquez, when you first saw the defendant, what was your immediate reaction?" Elena closed her eyes, remembering that morning. "I was confused and concerned. The site had been secured the night before, and I couldn't understand how anyone had gained access without triggering our security systems." "And what did you observe about the defendant's behavior?" He appeared calm and purposeful. He wasn't attempting to vandalize or steal anything. He was simply standing in the center of the excavation as if he belonged there. Reshtai's eyes narrowed slightly. "As if he belonged there?" "Dr. Vasquez, this was a restricted archaeological site. No one belonged there except authorized personnel." Elena felt the oath device's hum intensify slightly, responding to the emotional tension in her voice. "What I meant was that his presence seemed to activate something in the ruins. The symbols on the walls began to glow when he was there, and there was an energy field that we had never detected before." "An energy field that could have been dangerous?" Elena hesitated. This was the moment of truth. She could give the safe answer, the one that would support the collective's version of events, or she could tell what she had actually experienced. "No," she said firmly. "The energy field didn't feel dangerous. It felt welcoming, as if the site had been waiting for someone like Mr. Webb to arrive." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The Althari judges exchanged quick glances, and Elena saw something that looked like concern in their dark eyes. Reshtai pressed forward. "Dr. Vasquez, you're a scientist. How can you describe an energy field as feeling welcoming? That's hardly scientific terminology." Elena straightened in her chair. "You're right, counselor. Let me be more precise. The energy field exhibited patterns consistent with invitation rather than warning. The frequency was harmonic rather than dissonant. The amplitude increased gradually, rather than spiking to dangerous levels, and the field seemed to respond to human neural patterns in a way that suggested recognition. Recognition? Judge Morrison leaned forward. What do you mean by that? Elena looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Your Honor, in my analysis of the site, I've discovered that the symbols and energy patterns respond specifically to human genetic markers. Not just any human, but humans with certain rare genetic sequences that appear in less than 1% of the population. The crystalline judge, who had remained silent until now, spoke in a voice like wind chimes. Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting that this ancient site was designed to interact with specific humans? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Your Honor. The technology embedded in the site is far more advanced than anything we've seen from the pre-collective period of human history. It's almost as if it was built by a more advanced human civilization. Prosecutor Reshetai objected strenuously. Your Honor, this line of testimony is pure speculation. There is no evidence of any advanced human civilization predating collective contact. But Elena was just getting started. Actually, Counselor, there is evidence. Over the past 3 days, I've been analyzing data from 6 other archaeological sites around the world. Sites that have been classified as restricted by the Collective Archaeological Survey and kept from public study. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a data pad. With the court's permission, I'd like to present my findings. Judge Morrison looked to the other judges, who conferred briefly in their various languages. Permission granted, Dr. Vasquez. Elena activated the data pad and a holographic display appeared above the witness stand. The image showed a world map with 7 points of light scattered across different continents. These 7 sites, Elena began, all date to approximately the same time period. All contain similar symbol systems. All exhibit the same type of energy field responses to human presence. And all have been classified as off-limits to independent research by the Collective Archaeological Survey. The Kethmori judge clicked his mandibles. Together in what Elena had learned was their equivalent of surprise. Dr. Vasquez, are you accusing the Collective of suppressing archaeological evidence? Elena took another deep breath. I'm presenting evidence that suggests the Collective has been selectively controlling access to sites that might reveal uncomfortable truths about human history. The courtroom erupted again. Collective officials in the gallery began speaking rapidly in their native languages, while human observers looked shocked and confused. Judge Morrison banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. When the noise died down, Prosecutor Reshetai was on her feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Dr. Vasquez is making wild accusations without any credible proof. The Collective Archaeological Survey has always operated with complete transparency. Elena turned to face the prosecutor directly. Then why has my team been denied access to sites 2 through 6? Why are the survey reports classified at levels that even senior human officials can't access? And why did Commander Zethkar immediately call for military backup when he saw Mr. Webb at the excavation? She hadn't planned to reveal that last detail, but the words came out before she could stop them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Commander Zethkar, who was seated in the gallery, stood up abruptly and began moving toward the exit. Judge Morrison's voice stopped him cold. Commander Zethkar, please remain seated. I believe you may need to testify before this tribunal. The Althari commander froze, his elegant form rigid with what Elena could only interpret as fear. Slowly he returned to his seat, but his dark eyes remained fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Marcus spoke for the first time since Elena had begun her testimony. Your Honor, Dr. Vasquez has stumbled upon something that the Collective has spent considerable effort to conceal. With your permission, I'd like to explain why those sites are so important and why my people have guarded them for millennia. Advocate Telnos looked panicked. Your Honor, my client isn't prepared to testify at this time. I need to confer with him about— I waive my right to counsel, Marcus interrupted. What I have to say is too important to be filtered through legal procedures. Judge Morrison studied Marcus carefully. Mr. Webb, you understand that anything you say here will be part of the official record and can be used against you. Marcus smiled. Your Honor, what I'm about to reveal will make the charges against me seem insignificant by comparison. He stood slowly, his chains clinking in the absolute silence of the courtroom. The 7 sites that Dr. Vasquez has identified are not just archaeological ruins. They are data storage facilities, built by an advanced human civilization that existed 12,000 years ago, a civilization that the Collective destroyed in what they call the Great Cleansing. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Then Commander Zethkar spoke, his musical voice filled with an emotion she had never heard from an Althari before. Desperation. You cannot be allowed to continue this testimony. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be revealed. Judge Morrison's eyes flashed with anger. Commander, you will not threaten a witness in my courtroom. Security, please ensure that Commander Zethkar remains seated and silent. But Marcus raised his hand. Let him speak, Your Honor. Let the collective representative explain why the truth is so dangerous. Let him tell this tribunal about the genetic weapons used to erase human memory. About the 12,000 years of careful manipulation. About the final integration project that will complete humanity's enslavement. Elena watched as the color drained from Commander Zethkar's face. Around the courtroom, other collective officials were rising from their seats, some heading for the exits, others speaking urgently into communication devices. Your Honor, weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Whatever happened next would determine not just Marcus Webb's fate, but potentially the future of humanity itself. The courtroom remained frozen in absolute silence as Elena's admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her human features reflecting the confusion and growing alarm that Elena felt spreading through the chamber. Dr. Vasquez, Judge Morrison said carefully, can you describe these dreams in more detail? Elena closed her eyes, allowing the memories she had always suppressed to flow freely for the first time. I dream of standing on a platform made of light, looking down at Earth from orbit. I see cities built into the sides of mountains, with bridges made of energy spanning impossible distances. I remember technologies that bend space and time, and I remember being part of a civilization that explored not just the galaxy, but other dimensions entirely. The oath device began to pulse with increasing intensity, its blue light shifting toward white as it detected the absolute truth in her words. More than that, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. I remember the war. I remember ships filling the sky like dark clouds and weapons that could destroy entire star systems. I remember the choice we had to make, fight and risk the complete extinction of humanity, or submit to having our civilization reset to a primitive state. Commander Zethkar suddenly stood up, his elegant form trembling with barely controlled emotion. Stop this immediately. This testimony threatens the stability of the entire galactic community. Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. Commander, sit down now or I will have you removed from this courtroom. But Zethkar was beyond caring about courtroom protocol. You don't understand what you're unleashing. The genetic locks were put in place for the safety of every species in the galaxy. If humans remember what they once were, if they access their full potential, they will become a threat that no force in the universe can contain. The admission hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Marcus smiled grimly as the collective's own representative confirmed everything he had been trying to prove. Thank you, Commander, Marcus said quietly. You've just validated 12,000 years of hidden history in a single outburst. Judge Morrison looked stunned. Commander Zethkar, are you admitting that the collective has deliberately suppressed human genetic potential? Zethkar seemed to realize what he had revealed, and his composure cracked completely. It was necessary. You cannot imagine what humans were capable of before the cleansing. They didn't just explore space, they reshaped reality itself. They could manipulate matter at the quantum level with nothing more than concentrated thought. They were becoming something beyond physical existence. Elena felt something awakening in the deepest part of her mind, memories that had been locked away since birth beginning to stir. I remember, she whispered, and her voice carried a harmonic resonance that made the crystalline judge ring like a bell. I remember the laboratories where we learned to fold space, where we discovered how to communicate across vast distances without technology. I remember the day we made first contact with beings from parallel universes. The holographic display above the witness stand suddenly activated without anyone touching the controls. Images began to appear, but these weren't being projected by any device in the courtroom. They were coming directly from Elena's awakening memories. The images showed Earth as it had never appeared in any history book. Massive structures that seemed to grow rather than being built, with organic curves that flowed like water but were harder than diamond. Humans moved through these environments with a grace and purpose that suggested capabilities far beyond normal physical limitations. Impossible, breathed one of the Kethmori judges. No species can generate holographic projections through neural activity alone. Marcus stood, his chains somehow no longer restraining him. Elena realized with a start that they had simply fallen away, as if they had never been locked at all. "Not impossible for humans," he said. "We weren't just another species competing for resources in the galaxy. We were becoming something entirely new, something that transcended the normal boundaries of physics and consciousness." The images shifted, showing the war that Elena remembered. But this wasn't a conventional conflict between ships and weapons. It was a battle between fundamentally different approaches to existence itself. On one side, the collective species fought with advanced technology but remained bound by the normal laws of physics. On the other side, humans wielded abilities that seemed to bend reality to their will. "The collective couldn't defeat us through conventional warfare," Marcus explained. "But they had something we didn't: ruthless pragmatism. They threatened to destroy every other species in the galaxy, unless we submitted to the cleansing. They forced us to choose between our own transcendence and the survival of countless innocent civilizations." Judge Morrison found her voice. "You're saying that humans voluntarily submitted to having their memories erased and their civilization destroyed?" "The leaders of humanity made the most difficult decision in our species' history," Marcus replied. "They agreed to the cleansing on the condition that someday, when the galaxy was ready, the truth would be revealed and humanity would be allowed to reclaim its heritage." Commander Zethkar laughed bitterly. "And you believed us? You actually trusted the collective to honor such an agreement?" Marcus's expression hardened. "We didn't trust you. We prepared. The 7 sites that Dr. Vasquez discovered aren't just storage facilities. They're genetic resurrection machines. When activated in sequence, they can restore humanity's suppressed abilities and unlock the memories that have been hidden for 12 millennia. Elena felt the awakening process accelerating within her own mind. Memories flooded back with overwhelming intensity, standing in the great assembly when the decision was made, watching as the collective weapons stripped away layer after layer of human advancement, feeling the agony as her own consciousness was reduced to a fraction of what it had been. But with the memories came something else: power. She could feel energy flowing through her body in ways that defied everything she thought she knew about biology and physics. The air around her began to shimmer, and she realized that she was unconsciously manipulating the electromagnetic field of the courtroom. "The process has already begun," Marcus said, watching Elena with satisfaction. "Dr. Vasquez is one of the awakened. Her genetic sequence was designed to respond to the activation codes hidden in the archaeological sites. She's becoming what humans were always meant to be." The crystalline judge spoke in tones of pure panic. "Stop this immediately. If the humans regained their full capabilities, they could reshape the galaxy according to their will. The collective exists to maintain balance between species." Elena stood up from the witness stand, and as she did so, she felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her physical body. She could sense the thoughts and emotions of every being in the courtroom, could feel the vast network of communication channels that connected the collective worlds, could perceive the delicate web of political and economic relationships that held galactic civilization together, and she could see how fragile it all was. "The collective doesn't maintain balance," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions beyond normal space. "It maintains control. You've convinced yourselves that suppressing human potential was necessary for galactic stability. But the truth is that you were simply afraid of competition." Judge Morrison stood as well, and Elena could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. As a human, she was beginning to feel the same awakening process that Elena was experiencing. As a collective judge, she was trained to maintain order above all else. "Dr. Vasquez," Judge Morrison said, her voice shaking, "what you're describing would fundamentally alter the structure of galactic civilization. Are you prepared for the consequences of such a change?" Elena looked around the courtroom, seeing it now through eyes that remembered what humanity had once achieved. The technology that the collective considered advanced was primitive compared to what humans had possessed 12,000 years ago. The political structures that maintained peace between species were crude and inefficient compared to the cooperative networks that humans had once facilitated. "The consequences," Elena said, "will be the liberation of every species in the galaxy from artificial limitations imposed by fear and control. Humans weren't becoming tyrants 12,000 years ago. We were becoming gardeners, helping other species reach their own full potential. Commander Zethkar made one last desperate attempt to regain control.
Security!
Arrest both the defendant and the witness. They represent a clear and present danger to galactic stability. But the security officers, many of whom were human, hesitated. Elena could sense their confusion and growing awareness as their own suppressed memories began to stir. Marcus stepped forward, no longer bound by any physical restraints. Commander, your fear is understandable, but it's also unnecessary. Humanity doesn't seek to dominate the galaxy. We seek to help it grow beyond the limitations that the collective has imposed. Elena felt the last of the genetic locks in her mind dissolving, and with their release came a profound understanding of what humanity could become, not conquerors or tyrants, but catalysts for a new form of galactic civilization, based on cooperation rather than control, on growth rather than limit. The transformation spreading through the courtroom was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Elena stood at the center of an expanding field of energy that made the air itself seem alive with possibility. Other humans in the gallery were beginning to show signs of awakening as well, their eyes taking on the same luminous quality that Elena now possessed. Judge Morrison gripped the edge of her bench, fighting against the memories that were flooding back into her consciousness. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. But even as she spoke, Elena could see the ancient knowledge taking hold in her mind. "Patricia," Elena said, using the judge's first name with a familiarity that came from shared genetic memory. "You remember the Senate of Worlds that we created. You remember how we helped the Veltar evolve beyond their silicon limitations, how we taught the Kethmori to communicate across dimensional barriers. You remember what cooperation really means." Judge Morrison's official composure cracked completely. "I remember," she said, tears flowing down her face. "I remember voting to accept the cleansing. I remember believing that we were making a noble sacrifice." Marcus moved to stand beside Elena, and together they represented something that had not existed in the galaxy for 12,000 years. Humans operating at their full potential. The energy field around them continued to expand, and Elena realized that it was having an effect on all the species present, not just humans. The crystalline Veltar judge began to resonate with harmonics that his people had not produced for millennia. "I remember," he sang in tones that made the courtroom walls vibrate. "I remember when our consciousness first expanded beyond individual awareness. It was the humans who showed us how to achieve collective thought without losing individual identity." One of the Kethmori judges clicked his mandibles in a pattern that his species reserved for religious ceremonies. "The shell-breaking ritual," he said in wonder. "We learned it from human teachers who helped us transcend our natural limitations. We had forgotten that it was not our own discovery." Elena felt her consciousness continuing to expand, connecting not just with the other awakening humans, but with every sentient being in the courtroom. She could sense their thoughts, their fears, their hopes, and most importantly, their suppressed memories of what galactic civilization had once been. Commander Zethkar backed away from the energy field, his elegant features twisted with something between terror and rage. "This is exactly what we feared. You're overriding the natural development of every species present. You're imposing your will on minds that cannot resist your influence." Elena turned to face him, and for the first time she spoke with the full authority of what humanity had once been. "We are not imposing anything, Zethkar. We are removing the artificial barriers that the collective placed on natural development. Every species in this courtroom is remembering abilities and knowledge that were always theirs by right." The prosecutor, Reshitai, stumbled backward as her own memories began to return. "The Altari were dying," she gasped. "Our sun was cooling, our world was becoming uninhabitable. The humans taught us how to manipulate stellar evolution, how to extend our sun's life by millions of years. We never would have survived without their help." "And how did the collective repay that help?" Elena asked gently. Reshtai's musical voice broke. "We convinced ourselves that you were becoming too powerful, that you would eventually dominate all other species. So we gathered those who shared our fears and planned the cleansing. We told ourselves it was for the greater good of the galaxy." Elena felt a profound sadness flowing through the awakening network of consciousness that now connected everyone in the courtroom. The weight of 12,000 years of unnecessary limitation and fear pressed down on all of them. But Marcus stepped forward, his ancient eyes reflecting both sorrow and hope. "The tragedy is not what was lost," he said. "The tragedy is how much time has been wasted. 12,000 years during which every species in the galaxy could have been growing, learning, becoming more than they ever imagined possible. Dr. Chen, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly stood up. Elena could see the awakening process beginning in him as well, triggered by his proximity to the expanding field. The research, he gasped. All the archaeological sites we've been forbidden to study. They're not just human sites, are they? Elena shook her head. No, James. They're collaboration centers where multiple species work together to push the boundaries of what was possible. The collective has been hiding evidence of cooperation between species because it undermines their narrative of necessary control. The energy field continued to expand beyond the courtroom, and Elena could sense awakening processes beginning throughout the city of New Geneva. Humans who had lived their entire lives with suppressed potential were beginning to remember what they truly were. More importantly, members of other species were rediscovering abilities and knowledge that had been deliberately forgotten. Commander Zethkar made a desperate attempt to reassert control. He activated his communication device and began speaking rapidly in high-level Althari diplomatic codes. This is Commander Zethkar requesting immediate implementation of Protocol 7. The human awakening has begun. All collective forces should prepare for... His words were cut off as Elena gently extended her consciousness to interface with his communication device. Without damaging the technology, she simply prevented it from transmitting beyond the courtroom. The time for fear and control is over, Zethkar, she said. The question now is whether the collective will choose to grow with the rest of the galaxy or continue to cling to an outdated model of civilization. Judge Morrison had regained some of her composure, though her eyes still glowed with the inner light of awakening consciousness. Mr. Webb, Dr. Vasquez, what you've revealed here today changes everything. The legal framework that governs galactic civilization is based on the assumption that species have natural limitations that require external management. Marcus nodded. That assumption was always false. Your Honor, it was a convenient lie that allowed the collective to maintain control by convincing everyone that independence and growth were dangerous. But if every species can achieve the kind of expansion we're witnessing here, Judge Morrison continued, then the entire structure of galactic government becomes obsolete. Elena felt the truth of that statement resonating through the connected consciousness of everyone present. The collective's entire system of control was based on the false premise that cooperation required submission to authority, rather than voluntary partnership between equals. Not obsolete, Elena corrected. Transformed. Imagine a galaxy where every species contributes their unique strengths to solve challenges that no single civilization could handle alone. Imagine technology that serves consciousness rather than controlling it. Imagine exploration and growth without the artificial limitations imposed by fear. The Veltar judge sang a complex harmonic pattern that Elena recognized as their species' equivalent of wonder. The great work, he harmonized. We remember the great work that was interrupted by the cleansing. The project to transcend the barriers between dimensions, to expand consciousness beyond the physical universe itself. Elena nodded. And that work can continue. All the species that participated before are still here, still capable of contributing their unique perspectives and abilities. The only thing that changed was the artificial belief that such cooperation was dangerous. Commander Zethkar sank into his seat, the fight going out of him as he contemplated the implications of what was happening. If you proceed with this awakening process across the galaxy, he said quietly, it will mean the end of the collective as we know it. Yes, Elena agreed, and the beginning of something far greater. The collective was built on fear and limitation. What comes next will be built on hope and infinite possibility. As the energy field continued to expand beyond the courtroom walls, Elena could sense awakening processes beginning across multiple worlds simultaneously. The network of consciousness that had once connected an advanced galactic civilization was reforming, bringing with it the promise of wonders that had been dormant for 12 millennia. The trial that had begun with simple charges against a tomb guard was ending with the rebirth of galactic civilization itself. And in the growing light of awakened consciousness, Elena could see the first glimmers of the extraordinary future that was about to unfold. 6 months after what historians would later call the Tribunal Awakening, Elena stood on the observation deck of the New Geneva spaceport. Watching ships from across the galaxy arrive for the first Galactic Renaissance Convention, the vessels in the sky represented a fundamental shift in how spacefaring species approached technology and cooperation where, once ship designs had been rigidly standardized, according to collective specifications, now each vessel reflected the unique aesthetic and functional priorities of its builders. Althari ships flowed like liquid metal through space, their hulls singing with harmonic frequencies that could be heard across light years. Kethmori vessels resembled massive geometric puzzles that reconfigured themselves in real time to optimize for different flight conditions. Veltar ships appeared to be grown rather than built, their crystalline structures refracting starlight into patterns that served both as propulsion and as art. But most remarkable were the human ships, which seemed to exist in a state of constant gentle transformation, their boundaries shifting between matter and energy, as their awakened crews explored the possibilities of consciousness-guided technology. Dr. Chen approached, his own transformation evident in the way he moved with perfect harmony between mind and body. The integration teams have finished connecting the seventh site, he reported. The Global Awakening Network is now complete. Elena nodded, feeling the vast web of consciousness that now connected not just humans, but willing members of every species across the galaxy. The network wasn't invasive or controlling. It was simply available for those who chose to participate in the collective exploration of expanded possibilities. Any resistance from the old collective leadership? Elena asked. Chen smiled. Actually, Commander Zethkar requested permission to join the next consciousness expansion session. He said that fighting the awakening was like trying to hold back the tide, and he'd rather learn to swim than drown. Elena laughed, remembering the proud Althari commander, who had once viewed human potential as a threat to galactic stability. The awakening process had revealed that the fear driving the collective's control had been largely projection. Species that had been convinced they needed external management to coexist peacefully were discovering that cooperation came naturally when artificial limitations were removed. Marcus Webb materialized beside them, using the matter-energy manipulation techniques that awakened humans were rediscovering. At his full potential, the ancient guardian appeared as he truly was, not just a man who had lived for millennia, but a consciousness that had maintained continuity with humanity's golden age throughout the long exile. The Veltar delegation has made an interesting proposal, Marcus said. They want to resurrect the dimensional research project that was abandoned during the cleansing. They believe we're ready to make contact with parallel versions of our own civilization. Elena felt a thrill of excitement. The Dimensional Research Project had been one of the most ambitious undertakings of the pre-cleansing era, an attempt to establish communication and cooperation with alternate versions of galactic civilization that had developed along different evolutionary paths. Are we ready for that? She asked. 6 months ago, most humans didn't even know they had suppressed abilities. Now we're talking about interdimensional contact? Marcus gestured toward the bustling spaceport below them, where beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been unimaginable under the old collective system. Look at what's already been accomplished. The healing of the Kethmori homeworld's ecosystem, completed in 3 months using techniques that combined human consciousness manipulation with Kethmori bioengineering. The Althari Solar Restoration Project, extending the life of 12 dying stars using human-guided stellar mechanics. The Veltar consciousness transfer experiments that have eliminated the fear of death for entire populations. Elena had to admit that the pace of progress since the awakening had been breathtaking. Without the artificial limitations imposed by the collective's fear-based regulations, cooperation between species had flourished beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Speaking of progress, Chen interjected, Judge Morrison asked me to tell you that the new Galactic Cooperation Accords have been ratified by representatives from all 17 former collective species, plus 6 species that were considered too unstable for membership under the old system. The Galactic Cooperation Accords represented a completely new approach to interspecies relations. Instead of a hierarchical system where species submitted to external authority, the Accords established voluntary networks for sharing knowledge, resources, and consciousness expansion techniques. Species could participate as much or as little as they chose, with no penalties for choosing different developmental paths. Elena walked to the edge of the observation deck, where a shimmering field allowed visitors to step out into space while remaining safely contained within the station's artificial atmosphere. As she looked out at the stars, she could sense the vast network of awakened consciousness spreading across the galaxy like a web of light. "Marcus," she said, "when the original human civilization made the decision to accept the cleansing, did they really believe it would only last 12,000 years? The ancient guardian joined her at the edge, his expression thoughtful. "I think they hoped it would be temporary, but they were prepared for it to be permanent. What they couldn't have anticipated was how much the galaxy would change during our exile. The collective's control systems created an artificial stability that allowed other species to develop in ways that wouldn't have been possible in a more dynamic environment." Elena considered this. "So the cleansing actually helped prepare the galaxy for our return?"
"In a way, yes.
When we were at our height 12,000 years ago, some species weren't ready for the kind of cooperation we were offering. They needed time to develop their own unique strengths and perspectives. The forced isolation of the collective period, as destructive as it was, also gave every species time to mature." Dr. Chen pointed toward a section of space where the stars seemed to be dancing in complex patterns. "Is that the Veltar Consciousness Art Project?" Elena extended her awareness toward the display and smiled. "Yes, they're using stellar manipulation to create poetry that can be experienced across multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's their contribution to the Renaissance Convention. The integration of art, science, and consciousness exploration had been one of the most surprising developments of the post-awakening period. As species rediscovered their full potential, the boundaries between different forms of expression and understanding had begun to dissolve. A chime sounded throughout the spaceport, indicating the beginning of the convention's opening ceremony. Elena, Marcus, and Chen made their way to the central amphitheater, where representatives from across the galaxy had gathered to formally announce the next phase of galactic civilization. Judge Morrison, now serving as the elected coordinator of the Galactic Cooperation Network, stood at the center of the amphitheater. Her transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable to witness. The rigid judicial authority had given way to a wisdom that combined human intuition with awakened consciousness, creating a leadership style based on facilitation rather than control. "Citizens of the galaxy," Morrison began, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensional frequencies. "We gather today not to celebrate the end of one era, but to announce the beginning of another. The collective period of our history, for all its limitations, taught us valuable lessons about the importance of cooperation and the dangers of unchecked ambition." Elena felt the truth of those words resonating through the network of awakened consciousness. The new galactic civilization wasn't simply a return to humanity's pre-cleansing state. It was an evolution that incorporated the wisdom gained during 12,000 years of struggle and growth. "Today," Morrison continued, "we announce the launch of 3 major initiatives that will define our shared future. First, the Great Healing Project, which will use combined consciousness techniques to restore damaged worlds and extinct species across the galaxy. Second, the Infinity Exploration Initiative, which will expand our understanding beyond the physical universe into realms of consciousness and possibility that we can barely imagine. And third, the Legacy Network Project, which will establish permanent connection points with alternate versions of our civilization, ensuring that the mistakes of isolation and fear are never repeated." As the ceremony continued, Elena felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The tomb guard, who had been arrested for protecting humanity's hidden heritage, had sparked a transformation that would echo across eternity. The shocking truth that had stunned the courtroom had become the foundation for a new chapter in galactic evolution. Looking around at the assembled representatives, Elena realized that this was only the beginning. With artificial limitations removed and cooperation replacing control, the galaxy was about to embark on adventures and discoveries that would make their previous golden age seem like a mere prelude. The future, vast and full of infinite possibility, stretched out before them like an invitation to transcend every boundary they had ever imagined. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth: